internal world of that code. And one of the interesting ways is to ask it to be creative. Ask it to make something, make a picture. You use Deep Dream in your kind of this Google kind of idea that Google were quite interested in understanding what its vision recognition software was actually seeing. So it kind of inverted the thing and just kind of create what you're seeing. Asked it to be creative about the images, and it started creating all of this kind of weird world that you saw in the video that Anil showed. And, you know, it shows a lot of dogs' faces and things because the world it's been trained on is the world that we've given it, which is full of images of us. But you can also learn bad learning. You can understand that the code has learned something based on the images being given because of its creative output. So, for example, Deep Dream exposed the fact that the vision recognition software that Google had created didn't understand what a dumbbell was, because whenever it drew a dumbbell through Deep Dream, it would always have an arm attached to it, because it had only ever seen dumbbells held by strong men and women, and it thought it was an extension of our anatomy. And so the bad learning, you know, we understood through its creative output through Deep Dream. So I think asking something to be creative is a way to expose perhaps what's going on internally inside a system.
Well, I think that's part of the limitation on current machine learning systems as well, is that it's one of the reasons I think it's wrong to say that they understand anything, is because all their learning is passive. You know, they're trained just by hoovering up data, and it can be self-labeled.
Don't you think that's a little bit what our own brain is?
No, because
doing?
we
Why
interact. Not? You know, we're active.
But isn't machine learning interactive?
No, it isn't,
learns, changes.
It doesn't make actions. It's not grounded in sensory interactions with an environment. So
it's a digital environment.
It's not really even interacting with that. It's not So I mean, we've done some stuff with. So it's not even choosing what data to learn from in most cases. You know, we choose what data to give it. So you can get a little way by having systems that select their own data where they represent their uncertainty in some. Sorry, we're getting some space. But fundamentally, you know, brains evolved in bodies, and bodies evolved in worlds with other brains and other bodies, and I think you can make a case the reason things mean things to us is because they're fundamentally grounded in their kind of sensory motor relevance for our survival in a way that purely abstract training doesn't work. If this machine had actually interacted with dumbbells, it would not have made that mistake of thinking the arm is part of the dumbbell.
But do you think we might get actually a kind of different sort of a digital consciousness, because we find it very difficult to interact with the digital world? It's one that we just, you know, it's in a high-dimensional space that we just can't, our sensory equipment doesn't allow us to do that. So perhaps we're developing a different sort of digital consciousness.
Well, I would say digital understanding, not consciousness. I think different.
But I mean, so there's the term, the noosphere, which Pierre Thiers de Chardin came up with. I don't know if you can elaborate on that, but this sort of level of super consciousness, and whether we can harness this next level for the good of our species, the good of the planet, leave it a better place. And I think that, you know, I often ask the question, where are we headed as a species? And is this next level of intelligence, the collective intelligence through machines, machine learning, actually going to help solve that for the future? And can we teach it to be compassionate, in a sense, and care for the planet and leave the planet a better place for our...
Well, empathetic AI is actually, I think, you know, a very noble aim.
So we have just a handful of minutes, but I in fact want to end by asking each of you a question, and Marcus, I'll begin with you. What is the big question in your field that preoccupies you at this moment? And I know that these won't be neat questions limited to a field, but what is a mathematical question, or what is a question that you believe math can answer that sort of preoccupies you?
Well, you mentioned in your introduction my passion for prime numbers. I wrote a book which is 20 years old, actually, about our greatest unsolved problem, which is understanding the primes, which are, you know, these indivisible numbers. They are basically the atoms of arithmetic. You make all numbers by multiplying primes together. From numbers you get mathematics, from mathematics you get science, from science you get the world around us. So in a way, it all comes down to these prime numbers to understand everything, yet we still don't understand a pattern inside these numbers. We know there are infinitely many of them, but we just don't understand the kind of any rhyme or rhythm to them. So that is something we call the Riemann hypothesis. It's an unsolved problem. I would sell my soul to the devil for a proof of that.
Anil, I think in a sense you articulate the work you do as the real problem. I know that there is in neuroscience of consciousness, there is the hard problem and the real problem. I mean, you're of course welcome to give me a different answer, but since you are pursuing the real problem, would you tell us what the real problem is?
Yeah, so that's my sort of take on this whole. So there is this big mystery. The philosopher David Chalmers called it the hard problem. In philosophy, it's known as many different things. It is the big question, really. It's like, what is it about biological systems, brains and things, that gives rise to consciousness at all? Why aren't we just complicated meat-based objects in the subjective dark? That's the hard problem. It seems unreasonable that any kind of physical stuff should give rise to experience, but yet it does. But if you look at the history of science, it often doesn't work that way. Like 150 years ago, people thought that life could never be explained in terms of stuff, physics and chemistry. There was a hard problem of life. There was a philosophy of vitalism that said in order to understand life, we need to appeal to something almost supernatural, an élan vital, a spark of life. But of course, we don't understand everything about life, but it's no longer a conceptual mystery. And what happened was, instead of trying to look for this spark of life that doesn't exist, biologists of the day got on with the job of just saying, what are the properties that living systems have? And let's try and explain those and see if we can make predictions about those. And bit by bit, the hard problem of life wasn't solved, but it dissolved. It faded away, and then it was gone. And that's what I think the future of our understanding of consciousness may well look like. Instead of trying to look for some magic essence of consciousness that sort of emerges from the brain in some sort of metaphysical fog inside the head. No, let's understand how consciousness is expressed in us, in other animals, explain, predict, control, and then bit by bit the hard problem of life will dissolve and will disappear in a puff of metaphysical smoke.
Louise, I think in 1959 was it that your grandfather sort of conclusively proved that all of us, all human beings originated in Africa, right? Is there a sort of hypothesis that one works with and goes out looking for, in your field, looking for answers? Or do you dig and see what you find? What is the question that preoccupies you today?
That's a tricky one. So he proved that our ancestry happened in Africa. Modern humans also evolved, we think, in Africa, and that's also pointed to now through this sort of genetic record. But I think, there are all these gaps in the record, and that's why we keep going back to try and push back our understanding. The window between 3.5 million years to 6 million years is very poorly understood. And that's really where all of this began. So we're focused very much on sites at that time frame to try and help elaborate that picture. And we know that to be in Africa and sites within Africa for sure. So we haven't, it's very, very slow work, obviously. For me, the challenge is going to be how can we speed that up? Because I'd like to have some of those answers while I'm still around. And that's why I'm really pushing the technology side of this and seeing if there's a way that we can actually use new tools to help us to actually speed up that search and do things in a more systematic way. And I think also to get people in the global south to get exposed, to understand, to ask the questions about where we came from. And so a large part of what I'm doing now is to really work through with schools and children to try and every child deserves to know or to ask that question about where we came from. And so that's one of the pieces of work that we're driving now.
On that note, thank you. This has been an exceptionally sort of fertile conversation. I had one last question, which was really about technology. Is there a single sort of piece of technology that has transformed your work or that has the capacity to transform your work, you think? It would be great to know how something as sort of eternal as hunting for origins benefits from technology, or how technology, in fact, can help answer the question of consciousness. Math, I think, is in fact responsible for much of our technology, so I think, how does that play into what you do?
Well, for what we play, so just imaging, for instance, let's just say we've got all of these wonderful fossils that for many years we've only been able to see the outside of. And now with imaging, the advances in imaging, you can actually slice these things open and you can look into specimens in a way you've never been able to do that before. So you've actually got a whole wealth of information internally, sort of growth structure, how things grew, when they were weaned, looking at rows of, in the teeth development, what they were eating. Things like that. So I think we're in a very interesting space that technology opens up a whole new wealth of information with specimens that we've had squirreled away in museums for so long. So we can do much more with them.
The first one is brain imaging. I mean, so we have the ability to look inside a living human brain while they're having experiences of different kinds. That still blows my mind that that's possible. It's